The first time I worked with soldiers from the United States Army, they got me hammered. They had a very simple trick. They took my drink when it was about halfway done and removed it and replaced it with a full one. It was in this way. I had about 8 or 9 whiskeys the night before working with them. I ended up with my head underneath the bar with a captain yelling into my ear. And luckily, the night ended late enough that no one was awake to witness me crawling back to my room. I wake up the next morning, I take about a bottle of Advil, and I go upstairs. And lo and behold, there are all the soldiers from the night before. And they're sitting up and they're staring straight. And it was only later I understood that this ability was a prerequisite for being an officer in the United States Army. And I must have mentioned the hero's journey the night before, not that I had any way of remembering this, because one of the soldiers asked me if I could elaborate. And it was in this way that I ended up talking to a room full of combat veterans from Iraq and Afghanistan about what happens when the warrior archetype meets the destroyer archetype. And what happens when you meet the destroyer is you lose something. You lose something of great preciousness to you, of value. You maybe even lose what is meaningful in life, what your purpose in life is. And the room became incredibly heavy, because this was a group of people who were acutely aware of their relationship to the destroyer. But what was even more powerful was that they didn't know there was a way out. They didn't know the journey continued. And I got to tell them about the lover. I got to tell them that there was a way that they could rediscover their passion, rediscover their life force and energy. And in this way, they could recreate themselves, birth themselves anew, and from that place, they could return. And they could return as a ruler of themselves. And I left that presentation thinking I was the greatest person on earth. I was going to solve all of the Army's problems with this. And 3 months later, I got a chance to have lunch with a 2-star general, Major General Dana Batard, down at the 1st Armored Division, a very forward-looking general. And I ambushed him. And I pulled out this book called The Terrible Love of War by James Hillman. And I said, we have to help the returned soldiers. They are initiates. They have gone to another place, a different realm. They have touched the divine. Because war is not something of ordinary reality. War is something that exists in the mythic reality. And we have to help them integrate this experience of having touched the divine so that they can return. And the way to do that is the hero's journey. And lo and behold, if he doesn't say okay. And so 3 months after that, I'm back in El Paso with my colleague and sister Kate and my colleague Amanda, and we do a program with a group of soldiers who have just returned from Afghanistan, taking them through the hero's journey. And I just have to tell you, it was awful. It was really, really terrible. And there are a number of reasons for that. The first is, it's a mistake to focus solely on combat trauma. We have a lot of soldiers who are suffering from PTSD from experiences that happened before they ever entered the military. Another issue is technological. I was told a story by one soldier. She was stationed in Kuwait her entire deployment. It was her job to watch drone feeds. And so she would watch, in real time, battles taking place. And she would watch soldiers getting shot on live streams. But because she was always physically safe, she felt she had no right to feel traumatized. But the biggest problem that we faced has to do with a marketing campaign the Army tried called An Army of One. And this campaign did not work. And the reason it did not work is because nobody joins the Army to be by themselves. Nobody joins the Army for their own individual goal. They join the Army to be a part of something larger than themselves. They join the Army for the camaraderie. And here we came into town saying, we're going to separate you out and have you go through a journey by yourself. And in fact, it's when soldiers are alone, when soldiers are in isolation, that they get in the most trouble. 2,500 years ago in the Iliad, towards the end of the story, Achilles is chasing the Trojan hero Hector around the walls of Troy. And for reasons we won't get into, Hector is wearing Achilles' old armor. And so the visual is really potent. Achilles is chasing himself. And the other thing you have to realize is that the battlefield is cleared. Everyone has left, which means Achilles is alone. He is isolated, and he is hunting himself down, trapped into the destroyer archetype. And this is something that happens to many of our soldiers. Resilience is not a quality of an individual. Resilience is a property of our human communities. Resilience is a property of our human networks. And this isn't just true for soldiers. If you want to know how well your kindergartner is going to transfer to first grade, do not look at their academic record. A much better predictor is whether or not they have a friend. And this continues. Programs that try and help disadvantaged kids get into college, the ones that focus on individual resilience, they can have acceptance rates as high as 90%, but some of them have graduation rates as low as 30%. However, programs that put kids together into groups of 10 and have those groups go to college together, they'll have graduation rates as high as 90%. In every culture around the world, when someone dies, the community gathers around to lend support and strength and resilience. I want to tell you a story from Oakland, California. And Oakland is a challenged city, and this is a particularly challenged corner. People would dump all of their garbage. They dumped their old mattresses. They dumped their TVs. People would graffiti all over the place. Neighbors wouldn't take care of their own yards. And so one day, one of the neighbors went out and bought a little 3-foot Buddha at the Home Depot. And he figured out a way to attach it to the concrete. And at first, nothing happened. But then one day, somebody left an offering. They left a piece of fruit. And then somebody else left flowers. And then somebody else came and swept up around it. And somebody else asked if they could build a hut for it. And little by little, this became a bit of a shrine, and the flowers grew. And then people stopped dumping their garbage. The mattresses disappeared. People stopped graffitiing the area. The neighbors started to clean up their own yards. Buddha taught that we are all connected, that we all must take care of one another, that this concept that we are separated is an illusion. And when soldiers are on the battlefield itself acts as the Buddha. They know they are in this together. They need to take care of each other. And they do. When they're deployed, soldiers have an amazing support network. And then they come home and it dissolves. Because coming home is supposed to be easy. And it's not. So that's why we're going back to El Paso, to the 1st Armored Division, and we're trying again, only this time we're doing it differently. We're not going to pull them out of their culture, separate them, get them isolated, and say, take your hero's journey. Instead, we're going to encourage them to take their hero's journeys together. We're going to empower them to take care of one another, not ask them, do you need help, but ask them, who are you going to help? Who are you going to reach out to? How are you going to continue that support network? And where did this idea even come from? When I returned from that program and was feeling very much down in the dumps, it was my community that came around me. It was my sweetheart, Tara. It was my brothers, Dove and Alan, my sisters, Kate and Darcy. It was Rosenberg. It was Whitney. It was Tripp. I know you don't know who any of these people are, but they're all awesome. It was retired Colonel Steve Rutkoff. It was Major Ryan Krantz. It was Ori. It was Court. It was Lisa. And talking to all of them, I realized what the mistake was and was able to do this anew. In Buddhism, there's the concept of the Sangha, which is the group of fellow travelers who are there to support each other on their journeys. In Judaism, there's the minyan. There are certain prayers, certain rituals you are not allowed to perform without a group there. And on the one hand, religions understand that these groups give us support and strength, but there's something even deeper going on, which is that religions understand that if you're going to touch the divine, you need to be supported in that group. And our soldiers have touched the divine. They have walked into that other realm. They have gone through a world of death and have come back alive. And the help they need to complete that journey, to finish their initiation, to return, is the help of one another. Every story gives you its answer in the beginning. You just don't know it. When I had my head underneath that bar and that captain was yelling in my ear, he was telling me his war story. It was in the cacophony, surrounded by his fellow soldiers who knew his experience, that he felt safe to share it. Our journeys only end when we return. We only become heroes when we return. And what we always forget is that we can only return together. Thank you.